Ben. Okay. So it is a real privilege and honor to welcome to the show Shaunti Feldhahn and Michael Sytsma. That you guys have a new book out, The Secrets of Sex and Marriage, which is right up the alley of what the audience of the Passionately Married podcast is interested in. And I know what the background you guys bring. This isn't something that was just thrown together. This is something that was a labor-intensive project. And so I'm thinking to start the conversation, I would love to just set the stage on how did this come to be as far as the two of you guys teaming up to make this happen? And then give a brief, what was the whole process of putting this together? And then I want to get into what are the surprises and the finds and the meat that we can use.
Go ahead, Shaunti.
I was just going to say, there's a lot there.
Yeah,
yes,
I'll let you start from your side. I'll talk just briefly on mine.
Yeah, so this actually started because my husband Jeff and I, we've done all these different research projects over the years, written different books. Basically, the premise, what we sort of feel called to, because we're not psychologists or clinicians like you guys, but we do have analytical backgrounds. And so over the years, we've done these different studies to dig out what really matters and kind of what are the little things that make a big difference in people's lives and relationships, essentially. Like if you're just going to change like this or this, what are those things that are going to make the biggest impact? And over the years, obviously, anyone who deals with anything related to marriage, they see two big issues rising to the surface, right? Sex and money. Mm-hmm. And Jeff and I had done a research project in a book called Thriving in Love and Money. And then we're sort of praying about what's the next project. And, well, this is this issue of intimacy is a big deal. And, oh, dear. Are we really going to tackle this topic?
Right.
And we kind of felt like we were being led to do it, but only if our longtime advisor, Dr. Michael Sytsma, could do this.
Perfect.
Because we knew we could do damage on this topic if we were not completely accurate. Mm-hmm. And because Dr. Mike is such a well-known and well-respected nationally as a sex therapist and sort of a thought leader in this area, has trained most of the Christian sex therapists out there, for example. We were really delighted when we managed to convince them. I'm not sure how we managed to convince you.
Well, honestly, it was your reputation, watching you for 20 years do your work. I come at it from a different side. My PhD from a tier 1 research institution where we were just grilled in how to do excellent research over 20 years ago. And doing it in sexual desire discrepancy in married couples, specializing in marital sex therapy, and just fell in love with doing the research and what you can learn from it. So have always done that kind of on the side for the last 20 years. And the opportunity to join with Shaunti and her demand for excellence in what she does, and to do a research study that truly is, hasn't been done this way before. To be able to do such a large dyadic sample was, that's really appealing. So that made it a lot easier.
And that's worth noting as we get started, just so the audience is aware that the dyadic survey you guys did, which is the matched pair survey. So Correct. It's not just you didn't throw out there, we're just looking for respondents. I mean, I remember when I was doing my research for the dissertation over 20 years ago, too. It's like, I just need somebody that has a pulse and can answer some questions, right? And that's all I need. I don't care who you are. Just get in here. I need the data. You guys went real strategic. Right. Because it's both sides of the dyad.
We actually have 4 different surveys that we did. 2 of them are nationally representative surveys. One of them is married individuals. So this wasn't dyadic. But the other one, the one that I love, was 501 married couples, that dyadic matched pair. And we're not aware of any research that is this large, that is nationally representative, that looks at marital sexuality specifically. So, and then of course, when you're working with dyadic data, as you know, that takes all different kinds of methodology, because you can't assume independence, and there's so much that goes into it, which is just part of the fun puzzle for me.
And expensive.
Yes.
Yes.
And an expensive puzzle.
Yes. Indeed. Okay. And so since we set the stage for what's the backbone of all of this that you guys did to find the data, to get the input and the information from the people. Let's kind of go. I mean, a lot of this will be in the book, and I imagine some of it may not be, but what was some of the things that were surprising or important about what you discovered?
Well, okay, let me jump in there. I'm the average wife and mom, right? Like, I'm a researcher, but I am not a clinician and I'm not a therapist. And so everything surprised me.
Okay, perfect.
Nothing surprised this guy. Nothing.
Okay. Except the kids.
Yes, there were a couple things that came out in the data, which he can explain in a minute.
Okay.
But there were a couple things that, precise nuances that he was like, whoa, that sort of debunks some of the field's assumptions. But in general, what we were going for was the stuff that surprised me. Like the average couple, right? Like, what are the things that are just obstacles that people don't realize they're maybe even putting in their own way, or that they're believing mythology that's causing an issue that they don't even know is there, like that kind of stuff. So for me, and for having watched now the impact on this, as we have been sharing this with leaders for the last couple of years, as the research and the analysis has been ongoing, and then now that the book is actually out, and watching the reaction of the general market, I personally think one of the most important surprises is helping the average couple understand the concept that there's not just one type of desire.
Right.
I mean, in your audience may already be familiar with it, but do you mind if I just unpack that for a second?
No, it go, because I think this is anything, even if some of the content we discuss today is a repeat for people, I think there's still element of repetition. Just we hear it again, and it's like, wait, that little nuance I didn't. I mean, it's kind of like looking back at research. It's like you see something initially, and then you go back to it, or it's even looking at scripture, and you're like, when did that get in there? Because the nuance is different because of where you are. So please lead on.
And we also have some numbers, and these are new, right? These are from these nationally representative samples, and that's helpful to actually know what are the numbers, right? But just for maybe people who aren't as familiar with it, or a repeat for those who are, one of the things that often gets in the way for couples is this subconscious idea that what you see on the screen and a movie or a TV show is kind of the way that sex and desire works.
Right.
Which is you have, the man and the woman kind of look at each other, and there's a spark, there's a desire, there's this surge of feeling of wanting somebody sexually. And then pretty soon on the screen, the two start kissing and the clothes are off and they're in bed, right? And it's just that you feel desire, you do something about it. And when we started working on this, I had been aware, because Dr. Mike had been, an advisor on this topic for years. I was aware that wasn't, the whole story. But what was a huge surprise to me was to find out that if you call that kind of initiating desire, and there's a second type of desire called receptive desire, the person with receptive desire, which not only doesn't match the Hollywood sort of portrayal, that the person with receptive desire, their physiology basically works in the reverse order. And they don't necessarily feel that surge of desire.
Right.
And that person decides to get engaged sexually. It's like it's a choice, looking forward to it, feeling like, okay, that'll come along there at some point. But then that person, the physiology starts getting aroused. I mean, assuming that this is a positive experience and
right.
a good-willed marriage and all that kind of stuff. But assuming that, then that arousal starts coming, and then that sense of desire comes in that maybe their partner felt from the very beginning. And
right.
when I first learned that early on, this was relatively early on in our, research and in our meetings with Dr. Mike, I actually started sharing some of that with just girlfriends, because of course
right.
all my girlfriends are like, what are you learning?
Give me the scoop, Shaunti. Give me the scoop. Yep.
And I started sharing this with some girlfriends, and I watched their eyes like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. And like this feeling like I felt like something was wrong with me. And no, it's just your physiology.
Right.
And it makes such a difference.
Yes,
once
it does.
we understand that and work with it rather than feeling like somebody's broken.
Yeah, I love the concept of it's a decision, and then hopefully the biology catches up to the decision, right?
Well, it catches up. It catches up if the body begins to be aroused, and they become aware of the arousal. They become aware of the subjective arousal, which sometimes those show up in different orders. The receptive person might experience this as, I enjoy our time together and I enjoy feeling the focus of my spouse's attention. Or it may be, wow, this is feeling good. But then they have to also view both of those positively. Right. And some people start to get aroused and they view it negatively, and the desire never shows up. They experience pressure, or they experience a performance kind of an issue, or a host of things can disrupt them being able to relax into it. But if all of those pieces are in place, I choose, I begin to respond both subjectively and body, and then I view it positively, that's when the desire circuit tends to click on. And being aware that, 5 minutes into this, I probably will be looking and saying, don't stop. This is good. Or I might be thinking, why don't we do this more often?
Right.
Because I'm enjoying it in the moment.
Right.
Well, and Corey, one of the things, I'm going to share a couple of numbers because this is actually one of the things that, to me, as we've now shared, like, I know Dr. Mike does marriage events, Jeff and I do marriage events. And as we share these numbers from the stage, you see the freedom that arrives when people are like, oh my goodness, like I'm not an outlier. Like, for example, just as a baseline, I believe if I'm remembering correctly, Mike, 55% of the population is receptive.
Okay.
And that right there helps put that sort of a framework around it. Right. Now, it tends to be more women than men, but not all. I think it's 73% of women are receptive, but 38% of men are receptive. And it tends to be more often towards the older guy who maybe might have been initiating, in his 30s, 40s, 50s, and then finds himself like, oh, like I'm more this direction now. But the thing that that Dr. Mike calculated from that dyadic data, which, by the way, Corey, made my brain hurt. Like every time we started into the analysis of this, I'm like, wow, it's just so complicated. But he actually pins down what is it that in terms of couples, marriages, what percentage of marriages have an initiating husband and an initiating desire wife? Like that matches the Hollywood idea, right? Like where both people feel desire and do something about it. And it's only 10% of the married couples. So 90% have a completely different pattern. And that is very freeing.
Yeah, that is. So when you think of that, as far as the whole process that Shaunti, you're the one that all of it is like, man, okay, this is all great data. This is all surprising to me. And it's freeing in a lot of ways, because that's the whole thing I love about research is we get so inundated with things. And I know you guys even point this out, and I want to go deeper into this, that the idea of most of what gets in our way of these like desire level differences between husband and wife isn't necessarily the actual difference, because it's closer than you think. That what gets in the way is my perception of them rather than them. And
that actually is the source of the greatest amount of pain. People think the difference between them is the source of the pain and of the distress. And what I showed in my dissertation back 20 years ago is it wasn't the calculated difference between the high and the low desire spouse. It wasn't the difference between what he said he wanted and what she said she wanted.
Right.
That difference is actually, as you just said, and we point out in the book, much smaller than most people believe. Most couples are within one or two steps of each other, but they believe they're further apart than that. And the more distressed a couple is, the further apart they believe. And so, you've seen this. It's a couple that sits across from you, and you look at him, and you say, how often do you think your wife wants to have sex? And he says, never. And you ask her, and she says 1 to 2 times a week. There's a big difference between 2 times a week and never. And the further apart that is, the greater the distress. And I look at her and say, how often does he want to have sex? And she says, at least daily. And I ask him, and he's like 2 to 3 times. There's a big difference between those two. And when you take a daily and never, that's a massive difference. And the further apart, I was able to show the greater the pain in the relationship. And if we can just get couples to understand, wait, you want what?
Right.
And I look at them and say, what if you didn't marry a liar? What if they tell you the truth? And then they shift to the same side of the table, and they start problem solving. How do we get to where we both want? And now we've got a couple that moves from being against each other to working towards a similar goal. And it's so fascinating to watch the pain disappear and the couple to get on board with it. I like to point out that couples that come to me for sexual desire issues, when they leave, they're experiencing about 1, maybe 2 times more sexual encounters per month, which is about what the best meds that we have for this do. And yet the distress is totally gone. They like each other again, and they enjoy the time that they have together because they've gotten on the same page. And it shifted. Like Shaunti was saying, when we do the marriage workshops, I like to listen to what people are saying as they walk out. And the greatest thing I hear is one spouse looking to the other and going, I'm not broken. I'm normal. It's okay for me to be me. And the shift that happens in the couple is profound in that moment.
Right. And because that's the idea of what you guys are just confirming in this is that there's a process of the differences between us aren't something to be as something's going catastrophically wrong, right? It's not at all that, right? It's just differences between us, right?
Yeah.
Generally.
It's easy to think that, oh my gosh, it's all the big stuff, which is one of the reasons why it shuts you down, right? Like it's easy to sort of shut down when you kind of think, oh my gosh, there's just no way to address this, which, speaking from the average non-therapist marriage, this is a topic that we don't have a grid for, because we don't even talk to this is the only topic really in all of marriage that most couples don't even talk about with even their closest friends. Right. Because it's private, it's sacred. I mean, some people do, but Jeff, my husband, always does, he does like men's groups and men's Bible studies, that kind of thing. And he's like, the sort of the deepest that you go is maybe a guy saying, yeah, there's just not a whole lot of action going on at our house. And all the other guys are like, like, and that's it. Like, that's as kind of deep as you get into this. And so because that we're lacking that perspective, it's really easy to also lack hope.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that I was so thrilled about in doing this research and talking to Dr. Mike for these 3 years that we've been working on this research project, and just seeing point after point after point come out in the data of this is not rocket science.
Right.
this is some of this stuff, not everything,
Right.
obviously, but some of it can be pretty simple. And if you can deal with some of the simple things, then okay, there may be some bigger issues there. There may be medical issues that, you have a specialized need or whatever, but it doesn't solve those, but it sure makes them easier to solve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I almost hear a lot of what you guys are describing and have found is, again, this is along the same lines as what we try to do here as a show, is how do we get out of our own way and challenge our perceptions that aren't necessarily based on the reality of what's right in front of me? Because that's the insidiousness of our brain and long-term relationship, that something happened years back. I can still think back 25 years ago with Pam of something happened, and it is ingrained now. I can never bring that subject up. I have to be careful about this. I have to all of that, rather than, no, that's not who she is at all. That was who she was. Right. That is not who she is. And that's what we do, particularly in our sex lives, because, well, I didn't really like that. Well, then that means I can't ever do it again, rather than, well, who says, because it's just like, it was bad timing back then. Or, I always make a joke. Sometimes Pam's rejection of my sexual overtures is really good judgment, because we're at Target, right? And so it's a good thing to have judgment there versus, man, she is such a prude, right? And they're like, no, that's not who she is, but it's just, and that's kind of what I see as I read through this and think about what you guys have discovered, is a lot of this is, like, Michael, you just made the comment of, it's getting more on we're more closely aligned than we ever thought we were, for a majority. And again, that's not everybody, because we're talking continuums here.
Right.
But it really comes down to, how do I challenge my view of what's going on and have the courage to get out of my own way and get confirmation of it, test it out.
And we also showed the high value of curiosity, because often when we step into marriage, we expect our spouse to be like us. And we don't understand why you don't want the way I do, or you don't want what I do, or you should be more like me, is kind of this unstated belief in the back of our mind that continues to come out.
Right?
Yeah. Many times I think it is. And so we step into it with, you need to hear me and you need to respond to what I want, as opposed to stepping back and going, wait, what? Unpack that for me. And so the couples that, we start to talk about initiating a receptive desire, and let's reverse the script. The husband says, wait, that receptive, that sounds like me. And instead of the wife looking at him and saying, you need to be different, in all of the 12 dozen ways that she subtly says you need to be different, for her to look at him and say, wait, what? So how does that work for you? And what is the internal experience of it? And to start to allow him to unpack and figure it out, and her become a student of how he works, rather than telling him how he should work. And then it goes the other way as well. Now we've got a rich marriage and relationship where I am learning who you are and we're becoming together. And I think that allows for the growth in the change that you're identifying, where I no longer see you as who you were, because I'm curious about you and I'm tracking your growth. And I'm watching how that does shift. And most couples in this arena don't do that very well.
And I think one of the reasons most couples don't is that because this can be an awkward topic to talk about. Now, obviously not for you, Corey. You have a podcast on this topic.
Right.
And perhaps not for your listeners, because they're the listeners of this podcast. But for many people, this is an awkward thing to talk about. And I think, what was the number, Mike? It was 73% of couples
73.
couldn't talk about this well.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that it is a shift of recognition when you go, okay, communication matters, which actually I would love Dr. Mike to unpack that for you, because he's got some numbers on that just blew my mind. But also that the ability to talk about it without it feeling all awkward and, whatever, it's actually a lot simpler than people think. And to some degree, it's even taking a book like this one and like reading it out loud to each other and sort of stopping and going, wait, is that you? Like, that's that curious approach. Like, what does that feel like? Like, I didn't realize you felt I was pressuring you? What was it exactly that I was saying? And that opens things up. We actually have some friends who are leaders in the marriage space who, they've read every book and they've done all the work and, but they actually told us recently that, and Dr. Mike, I don't think I even told you this, but they said that they had started partly as a way of sort of encouraging us. They said, you know what, we should make this our book that we read together, because they tend to read a little bit of a book together and, in the evenings and sort of talk about it. And they were thinking, we'll kind of dip into it and we'll read maybe, 5 or 6 pages a night and, talk about whatever sort of seems like, it's the thing to
worth
talk about.
Talking about.
Yeah. And they said, actually, really quickly, we gave up that idea because we were getting through 2 or 3 sentences and going, wait, what?
Right.
And that's how you think? And I thought, that's a perfect example. These are marriage leaders, right? These are people who've been doing this marriage ministry for years. And yet all of us have things that we can talk about.
Absolutely. Because there's so much that my perception or my wish or my desire or my way out there politically incorrect fantasy or thought or whatever, I know Pam's reaction, whether she puts on the poker face or not, and is trying to act like she's open to hearing it. I still know, she's uncomfortable with this. And so that's where I think I love how you guys are kind of framing this idea that marriage, we refer to married sex as a long game because it absolutely is. Right. This is something that we use this in all kinds of contexts. Like I'll make an overture or she'll make a suggestion about something. And it's not necessarily for right then and there or even tonight. It might be for 3 days from now when the things finally can work out to where it'll work. But it's not a failure because the overture was made and it didn't actually culminate. And so it is the language that you guys are helping give a frame to, I think, is what's the most appealing and beneficial, because it normalizes stuff, but it also equips, like you're describing, Shaunti, it gives you something to explore that's endless, because we change. As soon as we figure out, who my partner is, they change, or I change, or something else happens, and like I'm 51 years old, I can't do that anymore, or just so it's just that element of how it evolves. But as you were talking about, wanting Michael to unpack the communication aspect of it, I'm curious, because this might be a little bit of a tangent that gets to it, but one of the best advice I've ever heard when talking to your kids about this subject is telling, and I've told both of mine who are teenagers, if you can't talk about this subject with someone you're thinking of actually doing it with, you're not ready. But how does that apply to marriage when they can't talk about it? No wonder we got issues that can come up and we think are way, way off the charts.
Well, fear comes in so profoundly our sexuality is so central to who we are. And if you reject my sexuality, you're rejecting me. And if I tell you what I really would like, if I share with you my inner fantasies, and then you're just going to think I'm weird and reject me. So I can't even lay that on the table. And when we start marriage, and there's some of those early times that we toss something out and our spouse just looks aghast or horrified or just says no, like you said early on, we tuck that in and we make this an unsafe arena. And over the course of, a few years of marriage, we've got this massive pile of unsafe arenas that we don't go back and allow each other to grow from. And that, one of my mentors used to say a couple doesn't have truly rich, passionate sex until they've been married at least 30 years. And I think that's a really different way of looking at, sex, because if I've been married 30 years, I no longer have a 21-year-old body. It doesn't work that way any longer. And he said that's the point, because we learn by that age that sex is just as much about heart as it is about body, maybe even more so. And we learn how to profoundly connect with each other. That means dropping the barriers and the guards and stepping into those unsafe arenas that we have locked away for years and said, I can't discuss this with you. I can't be naked and unashamed before you, or you'll see me as wrong.
I'm loving that, Michael, because as we're sitting here recording, I've got like 3 months, and then I get the touch of what 30 years of married sex is. So sweet. Buckle up, baby, as you're hearing this.
I love what Barry McCarty and Michael Metz said in one of their books, that we have this mythology that says that every sexual encounter needs to be an 8 or 9 or 10 on our 1 to 10 scale, and that is so unrealistic. That after a few decades, couples realize that most sex is a 5, and there will be times that you look over at each other and go, "Wow, baby, I don't know what you did last night, but that was truly amazing." But there will be just as many times that we go, "Okay, check the box. We did that. We'll try to do better next time." And in that sense of, we still love being with each other in a way that we are not with anybody else in the world. That and
that's the beauty of the language of this whole thing.
It
is.
That
it's just that it's all such this ever flowing language. And I love the nuance you guys are adding of staying curious, of staying connected, being a student, because it is an evolving as we go, right? It's a challenge of constantly relearning ourselves and each other.
And every bit of it is a communication. The way we touch each other is communicating. The way we initiate, the way we receive the initiation, the way we postpone to another time, whether what that particular apex experience looks like is a communication. And so it makes sense that those that truly communicate well. Now, part of what was fun in the research is asking a couple if you communicate well. You get very different numbers from looking at, do couples truly communicate well? And Shaunti's got.
I was like, it was funny asking them those questions. And I don't know if we've lost Mike's video, but
it'll catch up. It's not a problem.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
But asking couples those questions about whether you communicate well, it was really hilarious, actually. And maybe actually instructive for your listeners, because I think the number, if I'm remembering correctly, it was something like north of 60% of couples said, "Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we communicate fine, without any issues or difficulty." Like when they were asked that straightforwardly. And then when you look at those exact people and you look at how they answered the other questions on the survey, we had identified about 5 or 6 markers of communication, and looked at, if someone, for example, says, if your spouse wishes that you knew something, would you want them to bring it up with you? Okay, that's just like a basic, another type of communication question. And some of those 60% or whatever who said, oh yeah, we talk about everything just fine. I'm like, no, I don't want my spouse to bring things up with me. It's like, okay. And so that's what we actually identified is when you actually look in practice, we're a lot of us who think maybe we are good communicators. We do have a lot to learn. And oh my gosh, Corey, from a perspective of your podcast and the benefit of talking about this topic, there were so many benefits. In terms of sort of like, hey, this is data that shows why my podcast exists. I'm wondering whether Dr. Mike should share some of that data about the benefits of communication.
The one that really jumped out is just in looking at the overall happiness or the happiness with sex when they do. We've got 6.4 times it goes up if they're talking well versus those that are not.
Okay.
And that's a massive difference. The other one, a lot of the research right now in a post-COVID kind of world, and we were completing our data collection in that stage. And part of what's discussed in the sex therapy forums where all of us sex therapists are talking online is the massive number of couples that are sexless. And we found that in our data as well. I don't remember, Shaunti, it was around 23, 25%, somewhere in there?
23% were low sex or no sex in the dyadic, in the matched pair survey. Yeah. And it was 21% in the survey of married individuals. So really high.
Okay.
So over 1 in 5 couples.
If I'm remembering correctly, it was 9% of couples were never. Like they said, we never have sex.
Okay.
So it was 14% that were less than once a month, if I'm remembering correctly.
And when you take and look at those couples, I wanted to know what's different in those couples versus the ones that are having sex.
Right.
And, one of the massive differences is just communication. That couples that had great communication, we've got almost 10% of those couples are reporting sex daily or more. Now, that's a big...
Compared to 4% of the overall population. Yeah.
And less than 1% of those that had poor communication.
Right.
And when we look at those that are not having sex, a very small number, I think it was like 7% of those couples that had great communication were not having sex. And I suspect, we didn't ask the questions, but I suspect that those were the couples where there was a physical issue or there's some other reason going on that keeps them from engaging, versus 46% of couples that have poor communication are sexless. It's a massive difference in those groups. Now, obviously when you do a single slice of research, you can't say if you communicate more, then you're going to have better sex. Because it could be that those that are having sex more are communicating more. But if the two of those things are correlated, then it makes sense that if we increase one, we're probably going to increase the other one. Right.
It should have impact at least some way and help in at least a small little tick going up. That could benefit.
Not a small. I mean, some of those numbers were huge.
True.
6 times more likely to be happy in your marriage.
Right. Well, I keep coming back to as I want to wind this down just because I think what's so impactful to me is getting, kind of going through everything you guys have and then talking to you today. I keep coming back to the framework we have and a belief I've got just from the training I've got with Dr. Schnarch, who's not a Christian. So anybody that's new to the show, but a lot of what you guys are talking about overlaps perfectly in the sense that marriage is designed to help us grow up. That's the whole point of it. That's what I believe. Gary Thomas uses the word, it makes us holy rather than happy. And he got that out in print before I could get mine out in print of it growing up. And so we fight about that. But it's that element of, it's me getting out of my own way. It's me being curious, to use you guys' phrase, that is so beneficial, of asking the questions, testing out a hypothesis, just seeing, and then just being open to because the idea of communicating, I mean, it's not, I personally think and professionally think talking about this subject is awkward, but I lean into the awkwardness and I grow more comfortable in it, right? And I'm able to handle the tension or it doesn't go well, and it's not a horrible thing. We come back to it, and it's because we've all have done that, right? I mean, through the courses of your marriages, you've had that where we didn't handle that well, but now we can do it a little bit better, and then this time is a little bit better. I mean, parenting is a great example of that. I got no clue what I'm doing, and as soon as I figure it out, they hit a different stage, and now I got to adjust to that stage.
Great analogy,
right? And so it's the same kind of concept of I need to expand me as I'm expanding my marriage. And that's where I get the whole benefit, because this conversation just confirms, wait, there's a whole lot of normal happening here. It's not a shock.
Right.
What's going on. It's just now how do we dispel that better, which is what you guys' work does, to let people see it as, okay, wait, if I'm not broken, there's hope there. So I can take that and move forward.
And when we look at animals, when an animal is in a safe environment, when they're fed well, when they've been able to get good sleep, they play. And the couples that we asked far preferred playfulness in sex over the seriousness in sex. And they come into our offices asking for it, but they don't have a safe environment.
Right.
They're bickering with each other. They're under pressure from each other. There's demands to be. And I just point out you can't be playful in that type of an environment. Right. Versus, my language is, marriage was God's first intervention in helping us to be like him. So it's God's first act of discipleship. And it's a really rough discipleship journey. But it's one that's well worth it. And as I disciple self, as I grow up me, I help to create an environment. There are things, we found that 30% of the women experience pain a third of the time. And, the numbers of pain, especially for women, was just really high.
Huge.
That's going to shut down the ability to be receptive, the ability to respond, the ability to be playful. And many times their spouses are not sensitive and aware of that. Many times wives are not even telling their husbands that this hurts every time we engage. Versus only about 12% of the guys, and the impact to them was much lower. But still a significant number of men. But you add any of those kind of variables in, and it shuts down our ability to really respond well. Stepping back, being curious, allowing our spouse to be different, and figuring that out opens up the chance for playfulness.
Yeah. One of the most encouraging findings, Corey, that to me, when Mike showed me the data, and he was crunching all of the dyadic data in the ways that my little brain just couldn't. And he showed me this one chart that I said, wait, that looks like this is saying that. And he said, yep. And this is to me the benefit of all the communication and the desire for playfulness, which is that most couples, both partners, both the lower desire and the higher desire spouse, both partners want more sex than is actually happening.
Right.
And that to me was like you've got a certain desire level. Yeah, I'd like this once a week or 3 times a week or whatever. And it's only happening, 3 times a month. But both people want more than that.
Right.
And that opens up all this space for what you guys are talking about of for not everybody, right? Not every couple, but if we can address some of these things that we just haven't talked about, or if we can get somebody help for the sexual pain, or, whatever those things are, everybody wants to connect more. That's a very encouraging thing to go into this realizing.
Yeah. No, that's incredibly helpful, because that's that element of now all of a sudden we can let the problem be the problem. We are not part of the problem.
Right.
Where we add to it because it make it about us, or, rather than wait, no, that's just 2 human beings that aren't the same trying to figure out this path together. where I can easily place it as you are the stumbling block in my world rather than, no, we're just different. What if that's actually a mechanism for my growth and ours?
Right.
And that's the beauty and love I have of marriage. Is I think that's the whole process of it. So, well, I can't thank you guys enough for this, for the work you guys do, because I'm having done the research in the way back and dabble still not near to the level you guys described. Thank you so much for your brains that want and like doing that, because it's such a valuable resource. So how can people find the book? I'll put all this in the show notes too, but how can they find more about you guys and the book?
Well, the easiest way, we've actually been creating a portal online with a lot of other resources as well. The book, Secrets of Sex and Marriage, you can get it pretty much anywhere. But the portal is also secretsofsexandmarriage.com.
Perfect.
And because Dr. Mike has that sex therapy background, he and some of his colleagues have been writing some articles and some specific resources if you need extra help in this area or that area. Where can you go to find referrals, for example? So all of that is on there and hopefully will be really helpful to people.
Good. Well, thank you guys so much for the time and all the best on the work as it continues, okay?
Thank you
Thanks so much.